The Indus Valley civilization was located in the floodplain of the Indus and Sawardi rivers, and it was about the best place in the world to have an ancient civilization because the rivers flooded very reliably twice a year, which meant that it had the most available calories per acre of pretty much anywhere on the planet. But people of the Indus Valley were trading with Mesopotamians as early as 3500 BCE. We also know that it was the largest of the ancient civilizations. Archaeologists have discovered more than 1,500 sites. So what do we know about this civilization? Let's go to the thought bubble. Everything we know about the Indus Valley civilization comes from archaeology, because while they did use written language, we don't know how to read it, and no Rosetta Stone has thus far appeared to help us learn it. I meant the other Rosetta Stone thought bubble. Yeah. Although, come to think of it, either would be acceptable. So here's what we know. They had amazing cities. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are the best known, with dense, multi-story homes constructed out of uniformly sized bricks along perpendicular streets. I mean, this wasn't some ancient world version of Houston, more like Chicago. This means they must have had some form of government and zoning, but we don't know what gave this government its authority. Cities were oriented to catch the wind and provide a natural form of air conditioning. And they were clean. Most homes were connected to a centralized drainage system that used gravity to carry waste and water out of the city in big sewer ditches that ran under the main avenues, a plumbing system that would have been the envy of many 18th century European cities. Also, in Mohenjo-Daro, the largest public building was not a temple or a palace, but a public bath, which historians call the Great Bath. We don't know what the Great Bath was used for, but since later Indian culture placed a huge emphasis on ritual purity, which is the basis for the caste system, some historians have speculated that the bath might have been like a giant baptismal pool. Also, they traded. One of the coolest things that the Indus Valley civilization produced were seals used as identification markers on goods and clay tablets. These seals contain the writing that we still can't decipher and a number of fantastic designs, many featuring animals and monsters. One of the most famous and frightening is of a man with what looks like water buffalo horns on his head, sitting cross-legged between a tiger and a bull. We don't know what's really going on here, but it's safe to say that this was a powerful dude because he seems to be able to control the tiger. How did these seals let us know that they traded? Well, because we found them in Mesopotamia, not the Indus Valley. Plus, archaeologists have found stuff like bronze in the Indus Valley that is not native to the region. So what did they trade? Cotton cloth. But here's the most amazing thing about the Indus Valley people. They were peaceful. Despite archaeologists finding 1,500 sites, they have found very little evidence of warfare and almost no weapons. What happened to these people? Well, here's what didn't happen to them. They didn't morph into the current residents of that area of the world, Hindu Indians or Muslim Pakistanis. Those people probably came from the Caucasus. Instead, sometime around 1750 BCE, the Indus Valley civilization declined until it faded into obscurity. Why? Historians have three theories. One, conquest. Turns out to be a terrible military strategy not to have any weapons, and it's possible people from the Indus Valley were completely overrun by people from the Caucasus. Two, environmental disaster. It's possible they brought about their own end by destroying their environment. Three, earthquake. The most interesting theory is that a massive earthquake changed the course of the rivers so much that a lot of the tributaries dried up. There was a long period of Aryan migration, and by Aryans we do not mean like prehistoric Nazis. We mean people from the Caucasus who migrated down to the Indo-Gag. Can you, Stan, can you just spell it for me? Thank you. We know about these Aryans primarily because they left behind religious texts, the earliest of which is called the Vedas. Let us read from one of the Vedas about Purusha, the universe-pervading spirit. When they divided Purusha, in how many different portions did they arrange him? What became of his mouth? What of his 2 arms? What were his 2 thighs and his 2 feet called? His mouth became the Brahman, his 2 arms were made into the Kshatriya, his 2 thighs the Vaisyas, from his 2 feet the Shudra was born. So this section gives a divine explanation for the caste system. Brahmins, who as Purusha's mouth speak to the gods, were at the top. Kshatriyas from Purusha's arm became the warriors, as you no doubt know if you've ever attended my gun show. Vaisyas, the merchants and artisans who provide money for the priests and the warriors, came from Purusha's thighs, because everybody knows the thighs are the money makers, and the Shudras are at the bottom. They're the feet, the laborers and the farmers who are the foundation of the social order. Also, the rest of us stand on them. The caste system becomes much more complicated than this, but that basic division into 4 classes remains throughout much of Indian history. In spite of the efforts of many reformers we'll be meeting in future episodes of Crash Course, the caste system is the foundation for another big concept in Hinduism, Part 3, dharma. Dharma is basically one's role in life and society, and it is defined primarily by birth and by caste. The whole idea is explained nicely in this passage from the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is talking to the warrior Arjuna. Having regard to your own duty also, you ought not to falter, for there is nothing better for a kshatriya than a righteous battle. The Bhagavad Gita is a section of a much larger epic poem called the Mahabharata, which basically tells the complicated and long story of a war between 2 kingdoms. And we can really see how important dharma is in this passage, because Krishna is basically telling Arjuna that because he is a warrior, a kshatriya, he must fight. Even if he's bad at it, like for instance, if he gets killed, it's still preferable to not living his dharma. It's better to be a bad warrior if you're a kshatriya than to be the world's best baker. Basically, you're better off fulfilling your own dharma poorly than doing someone else's well. That leads us to part 4, samsara, moksha, and karma. There are both personal and social reasons for doing your dharma. Right, the social reason is obvious. Dharma and caste combine for excellent social cohesion. You get the exact right number of bakers and the exact right number of warriors. We could stand to implement this system in the United States, actually, where everyone knows we suffer from a shortage of electrical engineers and a surplus of people who want to be on reality TV shows. That would never happen in ancient India. But say that your dharma is to scoop animal dung your entire life. Why do you keep doing that when you see other lives that at least appear to be far more fulfilling? That leads us to the concept of samsara, or the cycle of rebirth, often called reincarnation. The basic idea is that when you die, your soul is transferred to another living thing as it is being born. And if you fulfill your dharma, things improve and you get reborn into a higher being. You don't have to scoop elephant dung anymore. But the ultimate goal is not to be reborn as a Brahmin. The ultimate goal is to be released from the merry-go-round altogether. And that release is called moksha. The law that holds all this together is karma, which is summarized really nicely in the Aranyaka Upanishad. The doer of good becomes good. The doer of evil becomes evil. One becomes virtuous by virtuous action, bad by bad action. The Upanishads, by the way, are later religious texts that began as commentaries on the Vedas, but later became sacred writings in their own right. This is a really great way to organize a social order from top to bottom. Everyone has a role, and because their role has a religious dimension, society stays in balance. According to traditional biographies, our story begins in the 6th century BCE. There was this prince, Siddhartha Gautama, whose father kept him locked away in a palace because a prophecy foretold that the family would lose the kingdom if he ever left. But as house arrests go, this was a good one. Siddhartha had great food, great entertainment, a hot cousin for a wife, etc., but he suspected that there was more to life. So he snuck out of the palace a few times. On these travels, he encountered an old man, a sick man, and finally, a corpse. Having realized the ubiquity of suffering, Siddhartha left the palace, renounced the crown, and sought out the holiest men to try to find how it could be possible that life would come to such a terrible end. Eventually, Gautama became an ascetic, fasting and meditating for days at a time, hoping to find enlightenment. And finally, after meditating for about a month under a tree, it came to him. Nirvana. No, not that one. Yes, that one. He finally understood the meaning of life and began teaching it to people who would become his disciples. He had become the Buddha, which means teacher, and he taught the 4 noble truths, which are: 1, all life is suffering. 2, the source of suffering is desire, all wanting of stuff and prestige. 3, to stop suffering, you must rid yourself of desire. This sounds simple enough, but if you've ever been dumped by someone, you know that it is not that easy to just stop desiring. 4, so how do you do it? by following the Eightfold Path, which, as you may suspect, is a set of 8 prescriptions on how to live that we don't have time to talk about because, oh, wait, look, Thought Bubble, you put some learning in our learning so we can learn while we learn. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So as a religion, Buddhism involves a lot of meditating and moderation, and there aren't that many fun rituals, and if you're a Buddhist monk, you don't get to have power like most holy people do. You have to renounce everything, including your hair. And yes, some of them get to be kung fu monks, but only in China, where Buddhism eventually migrated and became a religion with fun rituals and all kinds of great stuff that's hard to Gautama probably wouldn't have even recognized. But we're not talking about fun, populist religion. We're talking about old school ascetic Buddhism. Sure, you might be happy and fulfilled if you follow the Eightfold Path, but from everything we've learned so far, it would appear that humans don't want to be happy and fulfilled, or else they never would have stopped foraging. But Buddhism was very attractive if you were a low-caste Hindu because there was no caste system. In theory, anyone who follows the Eightfold Path and renounces desire can be freed from suffering and achieve nirvana, maybe even in this life, instead of having to get reborn for maybe millennia and knowing that each time there is only a tiny chance that you will end up something awesome like a honey badger. Most of Indian history, India was not one unified place. It was tons of different principalities and city-states and everything else. But India did experience indigenous political unity twice, first under the Mauryan dynasty in the 3rd century BCE, and then again in the Gupta dynasty from the 300s to the 500 CE, but we're not going to talk about that because it bores me. Right now we're interested in one particular leader from the Mauryan dynasty, Ashoka. Because Ashoka attempted to rule through quasi-Buddhist principles. So Ashoka was initially a warrior who ended up expanding the empire that his grandfather started. And Ashoka experienced this conversion to Buddhism after he saw his own army devastate the kingdom of Kalinga. So Ashoka built stupas, these mound-like monuments to the Buddha, all over his kingdom to show his devotion. And he also put up pillars all throughout his empire that proclaimed his benevolent rule and said he was going to rule through something he called dharma, which according to one of the pillars went like this: proper behavior towards servants and employees, respect for mother and father, generosity to friends, companions, relations, Brahmins and ascetics, and not killing living beings. So that's one of the reasons why Ashoka's empire wasn't actually very Buddhist, because ultimately Buddhism isn't that concerned with the order of the world. Buddhism argues that the fulfillment of the self will lead to the order of the world. In the end, Ashoka's empire didn't outlast him by much, and soon enough Buddhism declined in India almost to the point of extinction. Anyone who's ever practiced yoga knows Hinduism is the most flexible of all the world religions, which is part of the reason it's often described as polytheistic. The belief that gods can take many forms makes it easy for Hinduism to assimilate other religious traditions, which is exactly what happened with Buddhism. In time, the Buddha came to be worshipped as another incarnation of one of the Hindu gods and not as a mortal teacher. So in the end, Hinduism, rather than purging the Buddha, enveloped him. So all this means that while Hinduism has a tremendous amount of variety and flexibility, its core tenets of samsara, karma, and the caste system have provided a remarkable amount of cultural and social unity to the Indian subcontinent for millennia.